Hey everyone, we're at Gnosis Knockout, Volume 3, and we're at the end of our interviewing course. That's right, we're at Interviewing 105, Interview Aftercare. So, let's recap. We've gone over how to research, how to treat our interviewee like a person and not a subject. We talked about finding the right question that's going to inform our interviews. And then yesterday, we discussed how to make sure that our interview is a conversation and not a questionnaire. Today, like I said, we're talking about interview aftercare. Now, there's a couple of things that I didn't touch on before that I'm also going to sort of tie into this lesson. So let's get started. Number one, let's start from the beginning. When we're starting our interview, as long as it's in person or video or an audio interview, it's a little bit harder to do when you're doing just a text-based interview like email or using Discord or Skype or some other form of messaging. Have sort of a warm-up conversation. This can be as simple as asking somebody how they're doing. This could be as simple as asking them about the anime that they're watching. Remember, you've done your research on this person, so you know a bit about their interests. Make sure that you let that person know that. So before the interview even gets started, before we even get to the aftercare, make sure to reiterate that this is a conversation between two people. So, start off nice. How you doing? Did you see the newest episode of Boku no Hero Academia? What did you think of it? How are you feeling about this tournament today? Oh, you've been knocked, like the team's been knocked out, they've been knocked out. Ask them, how they feel about it. Soft offer them maybe a chance to cancel the interview and reschedule. Make sure that you're being as personable as possible before the interview starts to really drive home that you're there to talk to them as a person and not just because they're a pro gamer. This is really important. Nobody wants to feel like they're being used, and so you want to make sure that the conversation starts with an understanding that you're not trying to use them. Remember, we kind of drive this home in 102 and 104, and I want to make sure that we're still in that mindset. Now, hopefully, you have completed an extremely dope interview, and you've got some really great quotes. You learned a lot about your interviewee. They've had a good time. Maybe you guys have laughed a bit, or at least you guys have shared a little bit of your souls with each other. Great. Now what? The camera's no longer rolling. The tape recorder's turned off. Your pen and pencil is down. What do we do next? Well, for one, continue the conversation. That's right. Just because the interview's over doesn't mean you just go, all right, peace, bye, run away. No. Continue the conversation. An example is when I interviewed Luffy after the top 8 for Street Fighter V at EVO 2018. One of my questions was if he was excited for Shonen Jump Force. If you guys didn't know, Luffy is a big One Piece fan. I wonder how you guys could figure that out. He was not hyped for Shonen Jump Force. Nor was he like, oh man, I'm excited to play it. So after the interview was done, I just kind of horsed around with him about it. I was like, hey, how come you're not so... I did ask during the interview, but then I made some jokes about it afterwards. This is the second time I've interviewed Luffy. So and the first time he was talking about how he wasn't feeling well, that he was kind of sick, he was a little jet lagged still. So we didn't really get to have a great conversation. So this time around, I wanted to try and let him know that, I'm a pretty fun person. So, we joked a bit about Shonen Jump Force. We joked a little bit about One Piece. And then, I was like, all right, thanks, man. When it's up, I'll ship it to you. And, it was all thumbs up. Make sure that you dedicate just a little bit of time to talking to your interviewee again. Just keep that conversation organic. We don't usually end our conversations with, that's all, folks, and walk away, right? there's that weird little lingering of conversation that still happens. And it's really important that we do this with our interviews too. And it's not pertinent so much to the actual interview itself, but it's extremely pertinent to the relationship that you're going to build with this player. For example, I have a semi-friendly relationship with Fanatics Whippo. I've talked to him a few times on Discord. I know that he's into board games. He knows that I'm also into board games. I've interviewed him twice now, I think almost 3 times. And I think it's really important that when you're done with an interview that you take some time to get to know your interviewee so that they feel comfortable talking to you again in the future. This is also extremely important when you're making sure that your interviewee is willing to share your interview. Usually, it's something that you really want to have happen is that when you're done with the interview, you want the person that you worked with to be willing to promote your interview. This is a little bit not so much on the topic of aftercare, but there's nowhere else really for this to fit until a future lesson plan. And that's, you want to make sure that the person you interviewed wants to organically share your tweet or post. Wherever you've put the interview, you want your interviewee to want to be a part of that process. Sure, it's great when Bonchan hits that retweet button, but it's more impactful when Bonchan quote tweets it, right? We know that sometimes we're less likely to click on a retweet than we are a quote tweet. This is very important, and it all ties back into that interview aftercare that we're talking about. We want to make sure that after we're done with the interview, that our interviewee wants to work with us. Make sure that you impart on them how important original and organic engagement is and how invaluable it is to you as a content creator. A lot of times, these guys don't know this. They just hit that retweet because you had mentioned it to them, and they think it's A-okay from there. Organic. We've said it a lot. It's probably the most said word next to like invaluable and I can't iterate this enough. Yeah, this is invaluable. You need to make sure that they understand that an organic engagement is very important. And the way that you make sure that they're willing to do this is by treating them like a person. When you're done, also, there are a few more steps. So you've had your after conversation, you've joked, maybe, you ask him if he wants to go grab food. Now, there's some really important stuff. You need to get an official contact email, especially if your player doesn't have open DMs. You want to get the manager's information, and if necessary, you want to get the team's social media information. This is very important because when you're physically at an event, it's very easy to get this information. Sometimes after you've left the event, it is much, much harder to get that information. Now you're asking yourself, why do I need this information? When you're done with the interview, and when you've turned into an article, a video, a podcast, whatever, you need to make sure that it hits as many eyeballs as possible. Now, this isn't about clicks or views, but you've put in a lot of work and you've also used somebody's time, and you want to make sure that there's value out of that, right? No one wants to do a lot of work for nothing. So, having the information of the manager, the social media team, the org, whatever it is that you need, make sure that you have all that information so you can contact them when your piece is ready and say, hey, my interview is going to be ready on X date. It'd be really great if we could get a retweet, if we could get an organic tweet. What type of options do we have? What can we do together? Do you guys have an announcement coming up involving the player? Is the player heading to another event soon? Can we tie all of this together? If you didn't have this information, you couldn't work with the org or player in the same fashion. You would just have to release the tweet and hope that the player finds it, likes it, and retweets it. We don't ever want to put anything to chance. The more that we can control the situation, the better. Therefore, make sure that you get all of this information. Emails. Find out if you can get a temporary follow so that you can DM, or have them DM you. Make your DMs open temporarily so that they can DM you, so that you can keep that DM conversation going. It's really important that you keep a good relationship with these people. Like I've said, I've been able to do repeated interviews with certain casters, commentators, hosts, players, personalities, all because I try to keep some form of discourse going way after the interview. And sure, you may interview that player once and you don't want to interview them again because of timing or whatever, but when people see that you're having active conversations with other pros or people in the community, it makes other people more willing to want to work with you. Sometimes appearances matter. Make sure, and this is again organic, make sure that you're trying to keep that relationship as organic as possible. Sometimes you're going to do an interview and the person's going to be like, all right, cool, let me know when it's live. You're going to tell them it's live. They're going to hit that like button. They're going to retweet. The end. You're going to try to engage with them. They're not really going to be about it. And that happens. Sometimes, you only have the ability to talk to them at events. But people are going to remember how you treat them. So if you're showing genuine interest in them before the interview starts and want to keep a genuine conversation going with them after the interview is done, they're going to remember that, and you're going to be able to have a good working relationship with people. Interview aftercare is less about your interview and more about your people skills. One of the most important things that you need to have as an interviewer is really good people skills. Really, it's not just about how you deliver your questions, how good your questions are. If you watch the great interviewers, and I'll use in the esports space, people like Avali, people like Born Free, people like Travis Gafford, people like Shocks. The reason that they're able to have great interviews isn't just because of delivery, and it isn't just because of the type of questions they have. It's their people skills. They're very good at getting people's barriers down and having real conversations with them. And it's not just because of that single space where the interview happens. You need to make sure that after the interview that you're having fun with that person in some shape or form. And you'll notice it a lot. If you pay attention to those post-interview moments, you'll see some joshing going around. You'll see some jokes happening. That's because once an interview's done, you don't just throw the person to the side. I've said this before and I'll say it again. We are talking to a living, breathing human being, and they want to feel like you care about them. And I don't mean like care about them like, you send them a Christmas card, unless like you became lifelong friends with them. What I mean by care about them is that you make it aware to them that they're not just a fact repository. And I've brought this up in previous lessons, and so it might sound like I'm just constantly using the same material, but that's because interviewing is actually really simple. It's the few things that people get wrong are the stuff that we're talking about. You all kind of know how to have good delivery. You all know how to come up with good questions. What a lot of things that I see lacking is the personability, the research done, and just sort of the general flow of your interviews. Now, it's been a lot of fun doing these lessons. I didn't know what I was planning when I was putting this together, and it's been a wild ride doing them. So I'm going to touch on briefly each lesson, and then I'm going to tell you guys some good news. 101. Remember, do your research. And research doesn't just mean looking up stats or looking up who they played and who they're going to play. It also means watching, listening, and reading any interview that your interviewee has ever done. This will allow you to make sure that your interview is unique and that you can maybe have even more organic conversations because you already know topics that they've talked about and things that they're interested in. In 102, we talked about the person and not the subject. Make sure that you're treating your interviewee like a living, breathing human being, and that means by having engaged conversations with them. Make eye contact. Don't just nod. Make sure that you're smiling, that you're making a face if you think that they said something that you don't agree with. Make sure that it's not just your words that is getting to your interviewee, it's also your actual expressions. Trust me, this goes an extremely long way, especially when you're interviewing somebody of a foreign language. In 103, we talked about the right question. What we mean by that is go into every interview with one singular plot thread that you want to cover. So that way, if anything goes wrong with your questions, you at least have that one plot thread that you can continue to follow. This also means that if you ever have a weak interview, something that you weren't really happy with at the end of the day, you can then use that one question and the other interviews that you've done to turn into a feature. Maybe you turn into a vlog, maybe you turn into a mini doc, but you'll have material to salvage that interview with. In 104, we discussed the importance of making sure that you're having a conversation and not a questionnaire. Do not be afraid to go off the rails of your pre-planned questions. You never know what your interviewee is going to say, no matter how much research you do, and this means that sometimes they're going to surprise you. Be ready for that surprise and be willing to take that ride. If you don't, you could set yourself up for a worse interview because you weren't willing to go off the tracks. And in 105, we talked about the importance of what you're doing after the interview. That means getting the proper contact information. That means making sure that you had a conversation with the player afterwards. And also just trying to keep an open relationship with that person once the interview is over. Now, the good news is this series has been well received, and we're going to continue doing them once a month. So once a month, we're going to do a 5-part series where I go over a specific topic. So next month, we'll be talking about journalistic ethics, and hopefully it might not be a 5-part series. I have to kind of sort of formulate how it relates to you guys, my content creators. And this is going up today, September 21st. Tomorrow, September 22nd at 4 p.m. EST, we're going to have our first of many journalism AMAs where I will be streaming and you guys can ask me whatever questions you may have about journalism, whether that's what to do when someone trolls you during an interview, or how do you write a cover letter, or how do you get a press pass. I will be willing to answer whatever questions you may have within reason. There are going to be times that I may not know the answer. Just happens. I'm experienced. I know what I'm talking about. But sometimes people ask me some really specific questions that I just haven't had to deal with. But yeah, so we're going to have a journalism AMA tomorrow, September 22nd at 4 p.m. EST. You can find that at twitch.tv/SageGnosis. It's the same. You can see, Facebook Sage Gnosis, Twitter, not Twitter, Instagram and YouTube. It's the same spelling just for Twitch. Thank you for joining this program. And until next time, remember to go beyond and plus ultra.